I was managing a small, independent bookstore in Melbourne, Australia, the kind with vintage globes and specialized atlases. A middle-aged American couple walked in, and the husband stopped dead in front of one of our large world maps, which was, naturally, centered on the Pacific and Asia. He just stared for a full minute. Then he called me over, genuinely concerned, and said, "Sir, this map is misprinted. America is totally off-center." I tried to politely explain. "Well, sir, this is a common projection in the Southern Hemisphere." He cut me off, insisting, "But it's the whole point of a map, to show the world with the most important country in the middle. Otherwise, the whole thing loses context." He actually suggested I buy a sticker and move the U.S. over. I was a teaching assistant for a world geography class at a university in the Netherlands. We had a handful of American exchange students every semester, and the first lecture always involved looking at different map projections. I put up a map, one centered on the prime meridian, the standard European view. A young guy from California raised his hand, looking genuinely startled. He asked, "Wait, why is the UK in the middle? Shouldn't the map be centered on the US? Otherwise, how do you see everything in relation to us?" I calmly explained that the prime meridian runs through Greenwich, England, and that many world maps are centered on Europe. He shook his head and whispered to the student next to him, loud enough for the class to hear, "That feels aggressively anti-American." He spent the rest of the lecture arguing that the map was a form of European propaganda designed to make America look small and inconveniently placed. I was working at an information booth for tourists in Sydney, Australia. A family from Florida approached me, clutching a poorly folded local map. The father slammed it down on the counter. "This map is useless," he declared. "We can't find anything. Look how far off to the side the states are. They've put Asia and Australia right in the middle, but we're completely on the edge." I took a deep breath. "Sir, you're in Sydney. Australia is here." I pointed to the center. "It's a Pacific-centered map. It's what we use here." He looked at me like I'd just revealed I was an alien. "That makes absolutely no sense. How is anyone supposed to plan a trip when the world is upside down and America is falling off the side?" He insisted they needed a global map centered on the Western Hemisphere because that's where everything important happens. He literally suggested I had a duty to my customers to only stock maps that kept the U.S. central. He walked away demanding to know where the closest American-centric cartographer was. My friend, who's an airline pilot for a global carrier, had to deal with this constantly. He once had a passenger who was furious looking at the in-flight map, which, for a flight from Germany to Japan, naturally showed the route arcing over the Arctic. The map projection centered the view somewhat globally, making the U.S. appear slightly to the left. The passenger called him over and asked, "Why is the plane flying over all this empty space? And why is the map wrong? America is supposed to be front and center." My friend tried to explain the concept of great circle routes, the shortest distance between 2 points on a sphere, and why a map centered on the Pacific was the logical choice for a Pacific flight. The passenger refused to accept it. "You're telling me the airline is wasting gas just to make us feel less important? That's terrible business, Captain." He honestly believed the cartographers were engaged in a subtle global conspiracy to undermine American geographic primacy. My friend said he simply nodded and walked away before he had to explain that the world isn't flat either. The exhaustion of having to explain the obvious is a universal feeling for anyone outside the U.S. service industry. It's like arguing that the sky isn't blue. You just give up. I was volunteering at a major science museum in London, demonstrating different map projections. I had the classic Mercator map next to a Gall-Peters projection, which shows countries in their accurate relative size, but is less useful for navigation. A loud, excited American tourist pulled his son over. He pointed at the Gall-Peters map. "Look at this, son. This is why you stick to American maps. This one is totally messed up. Look how tiny Greenland is. And why is Africa so huge? Our maps back home show you the real sizes." I stepped in, trying to be patient. "Sir, the map you're used to, the Mercator, distorts the size of land masses near the poles. This map, the Gall-Peters, shows their actual surface area." He dismissed me with a wave of his hand. "Nonsense. Greenland is enormous. My textbook showed it being as big as North America. You can't just shrink it like that. You guys are trying to exaggerate Africa for some reason. That's fake geography." The look on his son's face was sheer confusion, but the father was entirely convinced his grade school atlas was the final authority. "My cousin is a geography professor in Canada. She once showed a class of incoming international students, including a few from the US, an actual proportional map of the world. She said one American student raised their hand and asked, 'If Canada and Russia are actually this size, why do they need so much empty land? Isn't it just greedy?' My cousin had to pause. She explained that land masses aren't about need or greed, but just geography. The student wouldn't let it go, insisting that the US was the perfect size, and countries that were too big were hoarding resources. He genuinely believed that if you divided Russia's land by the number of countries that wanted it, things would be much more fair and manageable. He literally saw the world map as a game board that needed balancing, centered around his country's convenience. Another time, I was discussing the size of oceans during a casual dinner in Berlin. The American at the table, a visiting businessman, was shocked when I mentioned the Pacific is significantly larger than the Atlantic. He scoffed. "Impossible. The Atlantic is the main ocean. That's the one we cross to get to Europe. The Pacific is just out there. It's got to be smaller. If it were that big, it would be the main selling point, wouldn't it?" He couldn't reconcile the sheer physical scale of the Pacific with the cultural centrality of the Atlantic in the American narrative. He argued that the U.S. media never talked about the Pacific being a major ocean. Therefore, my facts were probably skewed. It was another one of those moments where you realize they think prominence equals physical size. I gave up on marine geography and moved on to the dessert. I was working at a major international travel agency in Dublin. A gentleman from Texas was booking a flight connecting through London. He looked puzzled when I handed him the itinerary. He asked, "What is this UTC number next to the departure time? Can't you just put the time in Eastern Time? ET? That's the real time." I tried to explain that UTC, or Coordinated Universal Time, is the global time standard, and we use it because it's based on the prime meridian, the global 0 point, ensuring everyone is on the same clock. He frowned. "But why would we use the time standard for England? Why not use EST? That's what we use for business. You're making this unnecessarily complicated. Can't you just start the clock at New York and move out from there?" He honestly thought the entire world's clock system should revolve around a U.S. time zone. I spent the next 15 minutes trying to explain the purpose of time zones and the concept of an international 0 point, finally just shrugging and saying, "Sir, your flight leaves at 10 a.m. Greenwich Mean Time." My sister worked as a tech support manager for a global software company. They operated 24/7. One Monday morning, she got a furious email from an American client who had emailed them Sunday evening with an urgent request, demanding to know why no one had responded yet. My sister called him. "Sir, it was 8 a.m. Monday here when you sent that. We were all asleep. It was Sunday evening for you." He became absolutely irate. "That's ridiculous. You're telling me you operate on different days? How am I supposed to know when to email you if you're living in the future? You need to adjust your calendars to the U.S. working week. This whole international dateline thing needs to be abolished. It's completely unfair to American business. He genuinely believed that because he sent it on Sunday, it was still globally Sunday. I guess the concept that the sun doesn't rise simultaneously for everyone was just too much for him to process. She just muted the call and massaged her temples. I met a backpacker in Thailand who had flown from LA. He was complaining bitterly to me about how confusing his travel had been. He said, "The worst thing was the time zones. Every time I looked at my phone, I was in a different day. Why does the world even bother with the international dateline? It's just a line in the ocean. Why can't we all just live on the same day?" The U.S. president should declare that the whole world should follow U.S. time, just to simplify things. He concluded, dead serious, that if the world adopted his proposal, think of all the confusion and jet lag we could avoid. I tried to explain that if we did that, the sun would rise at midnight in London and set at noon. But his eyes just glazed over. I just stared at him, unsure how to explain the concept of planetary rotation. I was on a high-speed train traveling from Brussels to Cologne. An American lady next to me, who had clearly only driven through states in the U.S., he was anxiously watching the map app on her phone. As we crossed the border from Belgium into Germany, she gasped. She grabbed my arm. Did we just cross a country? That only took like 40 minutes. Is that even legal? Don't you guys feel nervous being so close to everyone all the time? What if you accidentally cross the border while you're jogging? I had to explain that, yes, in Europe, the countries are geographically close, and crossing borders is extremely common, especially within the Schengen area. She shook her head in disbelief. That seems incredibly stressful. I drove for 14 hours in Texas and was still in Texas. You should build more space between you. It's just safer. She genuinely seemed terrified by the thought of accidentally ending up in a foreign country during her morning commute. Another story. I was a local guide in the Philippines, taking a group on a boat tour around some of the islands. We stopped to look at a detailed map of the Southeast Asian archipelago. One American man was completely baffled. There are so many islands and countries. Indonesia, Philippines, Malaysia. Why didn't they just build bridges? You guys are missing a massive economic opportunity here. In America, we connect things. We would have built massive overpasses and highways to make it one big seamless region. You should really think about commercializing this more. The absurdity of building billions of dollars in infrastructure to connect thousands of islands across vast distances completely escaped him. He just saw the map as a poorly optimized road network. A friend of mine who lives right on the French-Swiss border told me about a conversation she had with an American tourist. They were discussing the lack of a visible border. The tourist looked around nervously. Wait, so there's no massive wall? No heavy fencing? Nothing separating you from a whole other country? My friend said, "No, we're allies and we travel freely." The tourist was aghast. "That's insane!" That's just asking for trouble. In the U.S., we need borders, big ones, to keep everyone separate. You guys are living on top of each other. You need to demand your government put up some serious walls before it's too late. It was another example of seeing the world map not as a tapestry of distinct cultures, but as a dangerous, chaotic mess that only massive physical barriers could contain. He couldn't grasp the concept of non-militarized borders. I was working at a public transit information desk in Berlin, helping a group of tourists. One American man pointed at the map of Europe. He asked, "How large is Germany? Is it like a California size? or more of a Rhode Island size. I tried to explain that Germany is a sovereign nation with its own distinct size, which is approximately the size of Montana, not a U.S. state. He immediately got defensive.
Why can't you just give me a straight answer? Everything is relative to the U.S.
We need a benchmark. You guys should really start comparing your countries to our states. It would make the world much more understandable. He simply couldn't process the fact that a country, a whole country, could exist outside the size comparison framework of the U.S. state system. He was completely serious about needing a size conversion. I was traveling through Vietnam and I met a young American student on a bus. We were looking at a small globe she had bought as a souvenir. She looked at the giant landmass of Africa and then spun the globe to the U.S. She frowned. This is wild. Why is Africa here when this globe doesn't even show the smaller states? Like, where's Vermont? They shouldn't put Africa on if they can't even fit all 50 states on a globe this size. I had to explain that Africa is a continent with 54 countries and is a pretty significant geographical feature that usually takes precedence over a tiny state in the U.S. She just looked at me with wide eyes and said, "Wow, they should really make a globe that's just the U.S. and then the other continents in small print. It's very confusing for us." Her entire world framework was built on the hierarchy of her own country. I had a friend who taught a primary school class in London. She had a new American student who, when asked to point out his home country on the map, pointed to the middle of the Pacific Ocean. When corrected, he became upset. "No, that's not right." My mom said we live in the center of the world. That map is wrong. It wasn't about the continental U.S. It was about the feeling of being the geographical nexus. The sheer effort required to deprogram this kind of innate geographical self-importance is exhausting. I'm pretty sure my friend had to give him a coloring book version of the Mercator map just to keep the peace. So there you have it. The map is supposed to be a tool for understanding the world, but for some, it's just a broken mirror that doesn't reflect the image they hold of themselves as the center of it all. It's funny. It's frustrating, but it's definitely one of the most uniquely clueless things you hear when you work with international tourism. If you're a teacher, a tour guide, or just someone who owns a globe, you definitely have a map story that left you speechless. Share the dumbest thing you've ever had to explain about world geography in the comments below. Next time, we're switching continents and looking at the wildest assumptions Americans make about food when they travel. You won't believe what some people think about European pizza. Subscribe so you don't miss it.